I'm Dr. Anthony Fiorillo, Chief Curator of the Perot Museum, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the work we're doing in Alaska studying dinosaurs and their ecosystems. This is a conversation about the work that I've been doing. I completed 21 years of field work in Alaska. It is actually, I'm shaping the 22nd year already, trying to make some determinations about who, what, and where. As it was said, one of the real appeals was the fact that dinosaurs have been found in Alaska, and they challenge everything we think we know about dinosaurs, the stereotype. You know, when you think of a picture of a dinosaur, you tend to think of them in a swamp, and it was hot, and so on. And clearly these Alaskan dinosaurs are different. Something different's going on. And so that's part of the question that drove the first trips. And also, we are adapting new technologies as we can to some of our work, and we'll go over some of what we think we're doing. So with respect to the original, what I was just alluding to, why does a guy from Dallas go to Alaska? And as Bob said, I'm from New England, so the summers here are still an adjustment for me. But intellectually, scholarly, academically, while dinosaurs have been known from the early part of the 19th century, as recently as 1980, somebody could self-publish in the Alaskan Journal of Pre-Pleistocene Vertebrate Paleontology, the thinnest journal in the world, a paper that says, does the Alaskan record of land vertebrate fossils substantiate or contradict the long postulated existence of a Bering land bridge before the Pleistocene? And what is arguably the shortest abstract ever published, the answer is no. And in 1980, there still had been no record of dinosaurs in a huge state. And so this is a brilliant paper, by the way, because some of the figures are literally those of you that work with microfossils are familiar, you sometimes put them on the heads of pins, that there are figures of empty pins that said if we found a fossil, it would be on this pin. I mean, the captions is just brilliant tongue-in-cheek stuff. But that being said, the Pleistocene land bridge is actually, these are redrawn from some of the work that Larry Lawver does at UT's Geophysical Center, and he was good enough to give me some of his plates, and they're redrawn. So 140 million years ago, there's Eastern Asia, there's North America, and the heavier shaded ones are the plates of interest for this talk. 100 million years ago, there's actually the beginnings of something that looks familiar. 70 million years ago, it certainly looks familiar, and there's modern day Alaska. This is what's termed Beringia in the Pleistocene. And what it is this a land bridge by which people think of mammoths and woolly rhinos and people moving from one continent to another. But it turns out, with the plates being what they are, it served as a land bridge for dinosaurs moving from North America to Asia and from Asia to North America. And what's fascinating, and we won't get into it here, is that just like the Pleistocene, where more things from Asia seem to come into North America and then vice versa, it seems like more dinosaurs came from here into North America than the other way around. So the point is that by studying this and understanding the timing of certain things, you actually understand the biogeography of two major land masses. And that's sort of the underlying core issue of what we're trying to get to, is understanding how they did that. So a couple of things. One is to get perspective on the geography. I don't know, have you all been to Alaska? Okay, it's a pretty big place. And most people's perception of Alaska is that it's comes from a map like this where it's tucked in the corner, and Alaska is almost just a little bit bigger than Hawaii. But that's not the case at all. This is Alaska to scale. And this is literally coast to coast and border to border. Alaska is, in fact, 20% of the geography of the United States. And that's important because we're going to talk about essentially moving from places like the panhandle of Texas to the Canadian border. And we have covered quite a bit of the state by now. It is so big that you can walk the streets of Anchorage and find any tourist shop that will sell you a t-shirt that says this. That it is 2.5 times the size of the state we live in. And my very first trip up there, the guys on the crew were all set to give it to me because they knew a guy from Texas was coming to Alaska. And they had all their jokes lined up. And as soon as the first one got fired at me, I said I was from Connecticut and you guys have islands bigger than the state I'm from. It deflated them all. And so we could get to the business at hand. So once you get going, once you figure out where you want to go, you have to figure out what you're going to do while you're out there. And so we do a lot of hiking. Sometimes we do a lot of flying. These are the Wrangell Mountains of Wrangell-St. Elias National Park, the biggest national park in the U.S. It's the size of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut combined. We take boats, that's the Yukon River. And really what we do is we're focused on the rocks. We have worked through the Cretaceous, but we're really focused on, over the last 20 plus years, are things that straddle the Campanian-Maastrichtian boundary. The Prince Creek Formation, which we'll get to in a moment, the Lower Cantwell Formation, not to be confused with the Upper Cantwell Formation, which we'll get into in a moment, and the Chignik Formation. These are the 3 major rock units that we have been working on, but yet we have wandered off a bit and explored some other rock units. And yes, there are maps that show rock units that are unnamed. And I think it's just awesome. I realize that I'm referencing a book down here, Fiorillo 2018. There's a copy in my, feel free to take a look at it when we're done here. So where has the Perot Museum found dinosaurs? One of the primary places, have you been to the Perot? Okay, the dinosaur bones that you would have seen there all come from the Colville River in very northern Alaska. That's the Brooks Range. The Arctic Circle comes through here. And Prudhoe Bay is right here, which you certainly have heard of, being in geology department. These are the bluffs along the Colville River. This is us going to work. And what we would do is work various exposures through here. Another place we've worked is in the Central Alaska Range in here, in a place in a park, Denali National Park, that used to be called Mount McKinley, and now it's called Denali, the tallest mountain in North America. Here we have where we were this past summer, out on the Alaska Peninsula in the Chignik Formation. And this is a national park unit called Aniakchak National Monument. It is by their, if you go to their website, you'll see the phrase, "No lines, no waiting." And it's because they're the least visited national park unit in the system. You can't drive there. And they have about 100 registered visitors a year. So it's a pretty empty place. And we'll get back to Aniakchak in a minute. So who are the dinosaurs that we are finding? The Prince Creek Formation. This is that northern Alaska unit. There's one of the bluffs, and this is a quarry that's actually up on top. There's the crew. The camping restrictions being what they are is we had to climb that bluff every day during the course of our excavations. And what we were looking for and collecting are out of bone beds, and bone, 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 bone. And we, if you go to the Perot now and go to the 4th floor, we've put in a prep lab where people are working on stuff. It came from this site that I'm showing you here. This is the dinosaur that we got to name, Pachyrhinosaurus perot. This is a brand new reconstruction on the dinosaur. Our previous reconstruction was wrong, but the paper that supports this was published yesterday afternoon in the journal Systematic Paleontology. So that's as new as you can get. Here are our blocks. How do you get several hundred blocks off the top of a 300-foot bluff? There's the answer. And so we coordinate with a helicopter outfit. This is our dinosaur. In the next few months, it will have a new head to accommodate the new work, and this sculpture will be modified, but it's Pachyrhinosaurus perot. We were able to determine it was a new species, so in 2012 we published our first new dinosaurs from Alaska, and like I said, we've modified our definition of the dinosaur since, because 6 years has gone by and you learn more stuff. And so while we were collecting these things, we were noticing that some bones had been chewed on. And once we got the Perot dinosaur named and described, we went back to some of the other blocks and discovered what we had was the remains of a tyrannosaur, and it was a pygmy tyrannosaur. So we got to name a second new dinosaur from the same hole in the ground, Nanoxaurus. And Nanoxaurus literally means polar bear lizard, because we were trying to pay certain homage to the Inupiat people who still roam this area in their subsistence. Some of the other fossils are things like this partial skull at Troodon. There's the skull itself. And what Troodon is most noted for is having the largest orbits to body size of any dinosaur. And what does that mean? It means that it was well adapted to low light conditions. And you think about hawks and owls, and in this case, this is a barred owl and a marsh hawk. And at least when I lived in the DC area working for the USGS, at sunset you could go to Dulles Airport and watch as the hawks came in for the night, and they would literally land this close to barred owls, and it was like punching a time clock. The hawks would come in and say, okay, it's your turn on shift, and they'd land, and then the owls would take off. And so that's the model that we use to talk about Troodon being well adapted to the low light conditions of the north back in the Cretaceous. The most common dinosaurs by far are the duck-billed dinosaurs, a plant-eating dinosaur that called Edmontosaurus. And this is a immature. A full-grown one would be somewhere around 10 meters snout to tail. So after 21 years, there's a whole fauna of stuff that we have found. We have a paper coming out naming a new possum-like animal, and you can just imagine that'll just get people jumping up and down with excitement compared to what a dinosaur does. This is actually based on some work in Denali. So let's go to Denali now, where we have the lower Cantwell Formation. How many of you have been to Denali? Okay. Did you take a tour bus and go down the road? Wonder Lake?
Not Wonder Lake, all the way to the end of that. Got the name of that. I mean, it's the whole day bus tour.
Sure. So you actually drove right through? No, the bus took you through some of the best dinosaur country anywhere, because these rocks crop out within sight of the road for probably about 50 miles of that road. And so we didn't work within sight of the road, we worked on the other side, and that's where that is. And that's the Cantwell Formation, the lower Cantwell Formation. That Park Road comes through over here. The Tequanica Bridge is just right over there. The rock unit is broken informally into the Upper Cantwell Formation, this reddish stuff. That's Cathedral Mountain, and this is Double Mountain, Lower Cantwell. And that is a series of channel and floodplain deposits, and this is all volcanic. And it's separated by a significant unconformity. The dates off of this stuff are probably Eocene, and this is based on, we now have dates, but based on the pollen work, it had been thought that it was somewhere around the Upper Campanian, Lower Maastrichtian, and then the ash dates came in between 68 and 71. So that was a pretty good guess off the pollen. Sorry, it's not a guess. It's what the data tell us. Here's one of our camps, and this is actually the camp that led us to the track site we're about to talk about.
What's the fence for you?
This was something that the park insisted that we bring. This is bare fence because there's an electrical current through here, and there's a little thing here that holds 2D batteries. And I really didn't put a lot of faith in a wire system that runs off of 2D batteries, especially since topography, you see the pictures on the box and these lines are perfectly horizontal, but this corner, because of topography, the wires were about this far off the ground. So, you know, when you had to go heed the call of nature at night, you just stepped over the fence, and presumably a bear would just step over the fence this way. We were piloting that for the park, and we just said no. So again, here's the park road, and I just showed you that picture was looking out over here. There's Double Mountain, Cathedral Mountain, so that's what you were just looking at. And all the way along here is great Cantwell exposure. There's the outline of the park, and that's the yellow is the Cantwell. And this year, we're aiming to go outside of the park, out that way. But one of the things that we discovered was this track site. Every dimple you see on this surface is a dinosaur footprint. We published this paper in Geology in 2014. We thought it was important, so we actually paid the open access fee, so you know you can actually look this up if you're so inclined. The punchline to this is that we were able to throw a lot of technology at this because we had found this on the last day, and we wondered how you got these layers of rock superimposed on each other that looked identical. But the helicopter took us out the next day. The winds were nasty and didn't want to hover. The next year we went in and we discovered what it is it's one bedding plane breaking up going down the side of this mountain. And with that, and understanding how important this track site was, because it was the best track site in the high latitudes anywhere in the world, the park worked with us through the permitting issues on how to get into this site with a helicopter and get and do the things we needed to do in case the wrong earthquake at the wrong time sent this track site down to the Toklat River. And here are some of the tracks. There's a 1, 2, 3-toed track. One of the first things we had to do when we were investigating this is, was this the actual surface the dinosaur walked on? Or, as you would imagine, especially a bipedal dinosaur that weighs it's a multi-ton animal. The pressure put on the substrate there gets expressed all the way down through the sediments. And if you're dealing with what we call an undertrack, then there's a limit to the kind of information you can gather and the kinds of interpretations you can gather. So the first thing we had to do is determine that they were surface tracks. How do you do that? Well, these technical terms that paleontologists come up with, displacement rims and leaves. Here's a footprint, and just like when you walk through the mud gushes up between your toes. That's what we're seeing on the surface. And in some cases, the footprints had actual leaves preserved in the footprint. There's a ginkgo leaf within this one footprint. Good signs that they're surface tracks. Another one is there were invertebrate traces, things that if you look at a receding riverbank and see pools of water, you'll see insects doing what they're doing in those pools. And there are somewhere around 13 different kinds of insect traces inside the footprints. Again, telling us that this is the actual surface these dinosaurs walked on. We had coprolites. There's one that's sort of just like if you walked across a cow pasture now. But the thing that really blew us away was that at least half the tracks had skin impressions. And again, you don't get that expressed through the subsurface. So we had multiple lines of evidence to tell us that these were surface impressions. So that means that when you start to measure length and width, you can start to make statements about what the population of the duck-billed dinosaurs was like. And what we had were full-grown adults, sort of teenage versions, and little kids. So mom, dad, big brother, big sister, and little babies. We plotted up length width measurements, and there's the data cloud, and that's our length width measurements. And then we ran some cluster analyses. And the cluster analyses told us that we actually had 4 age classes of footprints. And there's expressed that way. And you can see there's only a few green, and we'll get to that in a minute. What that's told us when we plotted it is there's mom, dad, big brother, big sister, and so on, is that you had a fair number of small ones, very few stage 2, a fair number of stage 3, and then it tapers off with stage 4. What does that mean? We'll look at that. And then there are people that looked at the cell structure of duck-billed dinosaur bones, and they made predictions about the growth curve. And just like we have rapid period of growth, is duck-billed dinosaurs apparently grew slowly and then hit a growth spurt and then tapered off again. And what this said to us is these tracks are telling us the same thing, sort of independently testing something from a completely different data set, that's how duck-billed dinosaurs grew in the ancient north. Also, these invertebrate traces told us that the timing and the climate was different. Well, the timing of the track site was just like today. These things are only active during the summer months. This track site formed in the warm months of the year, and things like this mole cricket burrow are only found several tens of degrees of latitude farther to the south, so the temperature was warmer. So going back to convincing the park that this is an incredible resource that could go away with an earthquake, one of the things we thought we'd try is we tried to LiDAR the surface. And we worked with UNAVCO, which is based out of, I think, Colorado. And there's the UNAVCO engineer working with his camera in here, the stations, and we're working on the track site. The problem with the LiDAR is there's the track site, is ideally there's someplace over here for the guy to set up the camera to do his work, but there wasn't. So we had to do a bunch of ad hoc work so that he could gather the data. Because nature didn't quite cooperate. And just to make sure that we captured some things we needed, we of the old school went about making these molds. The molds ultimately produced these casts, which are part of an exhibit at the Perot. And you can see the stations again. This is a trackball exhibit that our data from LiDAR were not very satisfying. And so what we did was we worked with an exhibit design company, and we played with this. And we're not exactly misleading the public. It's all based on real data, but the LiDAR data did not give us the resolution we were hoping for. The molds are based off of different. The actual material is clear, and we got it in our heads ahead of time that we should put some coloring in the layers because we need to build the layers up. And so this is the final color. The first layer would be white, you can see here, the second layer. So this told us where we needed to reinforce and put the next layer and so on, and where we were in the process. So simple coloring of the molds. One of the other things that we're applying some technology is also in Denali. This is something called Big Creek. The park road runs along that mountain range there. This is a guy that lives in Denali, works for Alaska Geographic, and he brought to my attention this track years ago, which we published on 2012. There's a four-toed track, and they're long, skinny track. It's long, skinny toes. And this is a scanned copy of a cast of this, and it's got contours, and it's a color topography map of that track. It belongs to a very unusual dinosaur called a Therizinosaur, because that's a very unusual track. There's very little discussion about that. It's an Asian dinosaur. And to go back to the Beringia thing, it is something that it's very well known from Central Asia. It's very poorly known in North America, and here we have a finger of it in Alaska. This is a paper we published last August, and I'm going to jump out of this for a minute, go over here. And this is something we did, taking that scanning photogrammetry one step further, is we produced these, and these are actually figures from the paper. And what they are rotational digital versions of Therizinosaur tracks, and you can really play with this all day if you want. We have these things so that you can actually send them through a 3D printer. And that was kind of just something fun for us to play with. And that's about all we did with it. So that was an application of some technology to our Therizinosaur tracks. Another area that we've done some technology is we're going to go back to Aniakchak. And Aniakchak is just such an awesome place. It is just phenomenal. Anytime you can go out looking for fossils looking this way and watch seals and otters and sometimes whales over there, it's just like, it doesn't get much better. Aniakchak is famous for this caldera. This caldera was only described by geographers of the USGS in 1922, because this place is usually cloud heavy. So the peninsula had not been mapped. These guys figured something out and discovered this caldera, if you will. Aniakchak, the largest explosive crater in the world. Dramatic language given to us by a Jesuit priest named Bernard Hubbard. His career was spent at Santa Clara College in Oakland, California, and he was a huge name in exploration. In 1931, he wrote A World Inside a Mountain for National Geographic. So you go out this way, and it's hard to escape Father Hubbard. He described this area as where storms are born.
Is it same Hubbard that has a glacier name?
You know, I don't know that, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. Because Adventures of the Glacier Priest, that's what he was known to the public for. This is actually a product endorsement for a camera. In the 30s and 40s, this guy was huge as an explorer. And just as a reminder, he was a Catholic priest. He would bring the appropriate gear to hold Mass on a Sunday, and also a reminder that he was a geologist. So I love that picture too. But there are some great videos of this guy hard at work. This is Aniakchak in 1931, which is when it last erupted. And this is what it looks like now. In 2001, I was able to work with the National Park Service at a time, the timing was perfect, where they initiated a paleontological survey of Aniakchak National Monument in response to some governance by Congress, and I was the guy that they worked with. This is this is the lake inside the caldera. You land in the lake in a float plane, and then you raft down this river, and we went out to Aniakchak estuary. This is what's called the gates. So the lake is down here, and you rafted this. There's a raft through the gates, and then in a more benign stretch of the river. As I understand it, you can no longer raft this river because of the earthquakes. There's been calving of the sides, and even in a pack raft, you can't get through the gates anymore. So to go back to Aniakchak, the Park Service told me that at this point I represented more than 1% of the people who have ever rafted this river. This is the Aniakchak estuary. These are the twins. The park boundary actually runs between here, and here's the park, and that's the exposure of Chignik Formation. And everything we're talking about is actually just right here. This is at the end of that first survey trip, I found this track, and here's a 1, 2, 3-toed duck-billed dinosaur footprint. This is something that I published with Judy Parrish in 2004. This is a hard place to get to, so when we found the first tracks in Denali, which you can kind of drive to, that seemed like an easier idea. So we spent the next 14 years working there. In the last few years, we went back to Aniakchak. The Chignik Formation correlated well with Prince Creek and Lower Cantwell, so it's giving us this broad regional understanding of the paleoecology of the dinosaurs in the ancient north. The Chignik Formation is a great fluvial sequence in the upper part and shallow marine in the lower part, and also very, very coastal. The strand line is somewhere right there. Here's an example of some of the fluvial channel systems. And to summarize the section, the lower part is definitely marine influenced by evidence of marine bivalves and marine invertebrate traces, and the upper part becomes very terrestrial. There's an upright tree. This is a cycadophyte called Nilsonia, and what's really cool is some of the leaves have insect damage on them. So you're really capturing a lot of an ecosystem there. Our SED work, as it turns out, the rocks, you couldn't ask for, again, a more ideal setting. You're looking at these rocks, and this is the estuary of the Aniakchak River. That is the perfect analog for what we think we're seeing in the rocks. So there it is right there. You can watch the estuary at work, and you can go study the rocks. Recording the data, I'm going to show you a video in a moment that will include this track site, but this is one of the few bedding planes where you can actually follow left foot, right foot, left foot. Here's how we collected some data with these molding compounds, which set up very quickly, and I'll get to that a little bit more, as in right now. You are walking the beach. Here is a dinosaur footprint. We finished this mold, hopped the boulders back to the beach, and at high tide, that was completely underwater. And we were wondering, would it be there when the tide dropped? And it did. So we have great confidence in this silicone molding compound to be able to take quite a bit of beating. Some of the tracks are in cross-section. One of the neat things about Aniakchak, again, from a paleoecosystem, is that you get these upright trees spaced, you get footprints on the bedding plane, you get fossil leaves. The trees, the wood looks like conifer, so you've got these big conifers, you've got big herbivores walking between the trees. The plants are angiosperms, so the understory is an angiosperm understory. And then what's really cool is I showed you a picture of one kind of invertebrate trace, but there's another kind of insect trace. So you got little herbivores feeding off the little plants, and the big herbivores feeding off the big plants.
Is that an ash bed that buried the trees? Is that?
No, it's a sandstone. And we're still looking for ash. We've done some detrital zircon work on that, and but we haven't found an actual ash yet.
That's amazing that something that can transport sand wouldn't knock over the trees.
Yeah, I don't know the dynamics of that, but it's telling us this, the fact that there's so many of them tells us something about the spacing of the woodland and so on. We now know we got over 50 localities that produce tracks. We have, I've got these reversed, and I don't know how I didn't catch that, because that is an avian theropod or a bird. That is a non-avian theropod or a tyrannosaur. Four-legged ornithischian plant eaters and bipeds, the duck-billed dinosaurs. Show you a couple of examples. This is a theropod track. There's the middle toe. Digits 3, 4. These are the digits. This finger is your digit 3. This is your digit 2. That's your digit 1 and 4. And so that's what you're looking at. Is you're looking at a right foot impression. And you've seen a version of the photogrammetry producing a contour drawing of a footprint. Here's a bird track over here. You can see it a little bit clearer in the contour, and just to make sure you can see it, I've outlined it. And it's a type of track actually that was first identified and described from Lake Grapevine. So it's a crane-like bird. And so here's a type of track made by an ankylosaur. And that's one of the key characteristics right there. And so that is a front foot of a dinosaur that looked like that ankylosaur. The most common tracks are these duck-billed dinosaur tracks. That is actually something from photogrammetry. So that's a digital version. And we'll get back to that in just a second. The distribution is overwhelmingly duck-billed dinosaur, and a smaller percentage of representation of these other dinosaurs. That is important, and we'll get to that in a moment. This is that first track, and to show you how we've progressed. This, as far as I can tell, is the first time in 2004 a laser contour of a footprint was done and published. Now everybody does it, so it's become a standard because it seemed intuitively obvious. And this is that same footprint now with photogrammetry that we're doing out there. I think somewhere in the afternoon talk, we talked about 50 pictures with a standard camera, and the software stitches it all together. So that is that footprint. That's one thing we did. So this past year, we thought, why stop there? So this was probably the biggest project. Oops. This is about a 2-mile stretch of outcrop. And that upright tree is in this right here. There's actually another upright forest surface in these rocks over here. The original track is right in here. And that bedding plane you saw 2 of my colleagues mapping a trackway is right here. And so this is sort of a low-res video because it loaded quickly and we can get to where we needed to go. Given the quantity of photographs, we're talking about gigabytes of data, which we're still trying to work on processing. So this is how we gathered those data. This is a DJI drone, and what we would do is take all our pictures with that and then reinforce it with some standard standing on the beach. And then this is an old bunkhouse. It's not much bigger than that photo. We would try to process what we could on a laptop. Obviously, you've got batteries running here, you've got batteries running there. How do you keep your batteries recharged? Because you fly into this place, you're not flying in a generator. That's where students come in. Those are solar panels. And, he's looking for fossils here, and he's collecting sun energy there. He took it all in good spirit. but this was actually kind of a remarkably effective way to recharge our batteries. So some of the data that we've collected up here combined with down here, this is Beringia, which we talked about briefly. It actually starts from the Lena, formally, it starts from the Lena River, goes over to the Mackenzie Delta, and it's something that the Pleistocene people get all excited about. So, working in a public museum, I am oftentimes asked questions about dinosaurs, and it is interesting to me that people see the big skeletons but don't fully appreciate that they were breathing, living animals at one time. And so I think the common perception is, were dinosaurs through Beringia relatively homogeneous in distribution? And I tell people it's the peanut butter model, spreading everything evenly across a slice of bread. Or was it relatively heterogeneous in distribution? And I put the hadrosaurs down here near the water, and ceratopsians more upland. And we have data from the North Slope and from the fact that we are so tidally influenced in Aniakchak, and so overwhelmingly the duckbill dinosaurs overwhelm the track record, that clearly it seems the duckbill dinosaurs preferred really the beach environments, and the horned dinosaurs preferred the drier upland areas. And so the peanut butter model doesn't work. So a couple of the key takeaways are dinosaurs are found throughout several Cretaceous rock units in Alaska, whereas 21 years ago they were the number of discoveries you can count on pretty much 2 fingers. Now it seems like if you go into the Cretaceous anywhere in Alaska, you can't take 10 steps without tripping over a dinosaur fossil. And technology is providing us new and important tools in understanding the dinosaurs and their environments. And I just hit a couple of highlights, but there's a lot more work still ahead of us. The work is supported through something called the Perot Paleo Club. The National Park Service has been a deep friend of ours, National Science Foundation, National Geographic. Here are some key institutional partnerships in addition to the Perot: Hokkaido University and the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. And where do we go next? To understand the world we share and its history, we go wherever we need to go. And this is that cabin that I showed you before, and this is last July, the Perot Museum in the field party. And lastly, the shameless plug. I have a book that came out last year, about a year ago. I have some flyers with the all-important discount. And in that book, I name yet another dinosaur, Ionosaurus. And that is a play off the Roman god Janus. And in Latin, there is no J, it's an I. Think of a crucifix, and it's INRI, which is Jesus of Nazareth, King of Jews. So I went with the original Latin, and it's the point of the book is that I feel like by looking at the Cretaceous in Alaska in particular and understanding what a warm greenhouse world looked like back then, it will help inform what we think is going to happen as the globe continues to warm, and we wonder what a warming Arctic might look like. And that's why Ionosaurus is in the book.